Commander James Mitchell had been flying through deep space for nearly 15 years, and he'd learned to trust his gut about almost everything. That instinct saved his life more times than he could count. So when his ship's sensors picked up a faint energy signature from an old research station orbiting a dead planet, something told him to investigate instead of just passing by like every other trader would. The station was a graveyard. Dust covered everything and the walls were scarred with blast marks. Whatever happened here happened fast and hard. James moved through the corridors slowly, hand on his weapon, knowing that salvage sites like this sometimes held nasty surprises. His boots echoed on the metal floors as he searched room after room, finding nothing but broken equipment and forgotten files. Then he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it. A small whimper. The noise was coming from deeper in the station, from a sealed containment wing. James broke through the doors and found himself in what looked like some kind of research laboratory. There were cages everywhere, most of them empty or containing skeletal remains. His stomach turned. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't pretty. In the far corner, in a cage so small the creature inside couldn't even stand properly, James found her. The cub couldn't have been more than 3 feet long. Her fur, which probably should have been a deep golden color, was matted and dull. Her ribs showed through her skin like she hadn't eaten in weeks. Her eyes were closed, and for a moment, James thought she was already dead. Then he saw her chest move. Just barely. She was an Empress Feline. James had heard stories about Empress Felines his entire career. Every spacer knew the legends. They were apex predators, creatures that could kill a full-grown man before he could blink. They were intelligent, ruthless, and absolutely unpredictable. The Galactic Council had classified them as too dangerous to negotiate with. Most star systems had standing orders to shoot on sight. The idea of a live one, especially one this young, was almost impossible to believe. But this wasn't a fearsome beast. This was something broken and dying. Without thinking too much about what he was doing, James approached the cage. The cub didn't react. He carefully opened the lock and lifted her out, surprised by how light she was. She felt fragile, like she might fall apart in his hands. Her body was ice cold and her breathing was shallow. He could feel every bone in her small frame. Back on his ship, the Pathfinder, James laid the cub on a medical bed in his clinic. His ship's AI ran a full diagnostic and came back with a grim prognosis. The creature was severely malnourished, dehydrated, and had multiple untreated infections. She had maybe a few hours if he didn't act fast. "Commander, this is highly irregular," his ship's computer said in its calm, measured voice. "That creature is registered as a Class A threat. Protocol dictates immediate termination." "Yeah, well, no," James replied, already preparing medical supplies. He'd never been great at following orders anyway. That's partly why he'd left the military and become an independent explorer. He worked through the night, treating infections, setting up an 4-line, and getting fluids into her system. By dawn, the cub was still alive. Barely, but alive. James sat in a chair next to the medical bed, watching her breathe, wondering if he was the biggest fool in the galaxy. When his crew found out, they reacted exactly the way he knew they would. His engineer, Patricia, nearly blew a gasket. His navigator, David, suggested they space the creature and report it as destroyed. Even his usually calm doctor, Helena, thought he'd lost his mind. "You brought a killing machine onto this ship," Patricia said, her voice tight with anger and fear. "I brought a dying baby onto this ship," James replied simply. "There's a difference." He named her Nova because she reminded him of a bright light in the darkness. Over the following weeks, as Nova recovered under his care, James started to wonder if maybe he'd see something others couldn't. Or maybe he was just crazy. Either way, there was no going back now. The first time Nova opened her eyes and looked at James, he knew something was different about her. Most predators, when they wake up hungry and confused, go straight for violence. Nova just stared at him with these golden eyes that seemed impossibly intelligent, like she was trying to figure out who he was and why he wasn't trying to kill her. James slowly brought his hand closer, half expecting his arm to get shredded. Instead, Nova's ears perked up and she made this small chirping sound, almost like she was saying hello. That was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Nova's physical recovery was nothing short of miraculous. The infections cleared up. Her coat began to shine with that rich golden color. Her muscles filled out as James fed her carefully measured portions of high-protein food. But the physical changes were nothing compared to what happened in her mind. James had a lot of time on his hands during long stretches in space, so he started spending hours with Nova. He'd sit outside her recovery chamber and just talk to her. He told her about the stars they were passing, about the places he'd been, about mistakes he'd made and lessons he'd learned. Most people would have thought he was wasting his time talking to an animal. But James could see it in Nova's eyes. She was listening. She was learning. When she was strong enough, James let her out of the medical chamber. The rest of the crew basically locked themselves in their quarters. Patricia actually barricaded her cabin door. But Nova didn't attack anyone. Instead, she followed James around the ship like a shadow, watching everything he did, observing how he moved, how he made decisions, how he treated people with respect even when they were scared of her. "You're insane and you're going to get us all killed," David said one day, watching James and Nova move through the corridor together. "She's just curious," James replied, scratching behind Nova's ears. She made this deep rumbling sound, something between a purr and a growl. "Aren't you, girl?" About 3 months in, James started noticing something strange. Nova moved differently than she should have. According to all the scientific data James could find about Empress felines, they were powerful but heavy, built for raw strength and devastating force. Nova was fast. Really fast. When she chased a ball down the corridor that James rolled for her, she moved like liquid lightning. Her reflexes were insane. She could pivot and change direction mid-sprint without losing speed. Helena ran some tests and came back looking absolutely shocked. "Her neural pathways are different," the doctor explained, showing James scans of Nova's brain. "Most Empress felines have these thick clusters here and here, designed for processing threats and calculating killing strikes. Nova's brain is different. These clusters are smaller, but her overall processing speed is faster. It's like she has a mutation." "Is that bad?" James asked, worried. "No," Helena said slowly. "It might actually be why she survived being abandoned. Her kind probably rejected her because she was different. But James, this mutation makes her smarter than a standard Empress feline. Maybe smarter than any of them." As the months wore on, James started teaching Nova actual lessons. He'd point to things and name them. He'd demonstrate actions and watch her copy them perfectly, sometimes on the first try. She learned that no meant stop and good girl meant she'd done something right. But more than that, she learned about consequences and choice. One day, Patricia left a piece of raw meat on the kitchen counter. Nova walked past it, looked at James, and waited for permission before eating. Patricia actually gasped from where she was hiding near the doorway. "She's not acting on instinct," Patricia whispered to James later. "She's making conscious choices." By month 6, Nova had become something nobody expected. She was loyal to James in a way that went beyond simple animal bonding. She seemed to understand his moods, his thoughts, his values. When he made a decision, she trusted it completely. When he showed mercy to someone who'd made a mistake, she followed his lead. When he stood up for what was right, she stood beside him. The crew slowly stopped being afraid. They started bringing her treats. David even smiled once when Nova rested her head on his knee while they watched the stars together. James looked at this beautiful, intelligent creature who had gone from a dying, abandoned cub to something extraordinary, and he realized something. Nova hadn't just bonded with him. She had bonded with his values, his way of seeing the universe. She had learned to be human in all the ways that mattered most. The attack came without warning, just like most attacks in deep space do. James was in the bridge reviewing star charts when the proximity alarm screamed to life. His stomach dropped. In 15 years of flying solo routes, he'd learned to recognize that particular sound. "Raiders." Multiple contacts closing in fast. David called out from the navigation station, his voice tight. 3 ships, military-grade weapons. "They're hailing us." "Don't answer," James said, already moving toward the weapons console. "Get us some distance. Now." But there was nowhere to run. The raiders had bracketed them perfectly, cutting off escape vectors. They knew what they were doing. This wasn't some random attack. These were professionals and they wanted something specific. Probably the rare isotopes James had picked up from a mining colony 2 weeks ago. Worth enough credits to make a serious score. The first laser strike hit the Pathfinder's starboard side, and alarms wailed through every corridor. The ship shuddered and James felt his teeth rattle. "Hull breach on deck 3, Helena's voice came through the communication system, steady but scared. "I'm sealing bulkheads. We can hold for maybe 10 minutes if they keep hitting us like that." James was about to order David to plot a jump to hyperspace, even though it was dangerous, when he realized something. Nova wasn't in the bridge with him anymore. She'd been curled up in the corner, but the moment the first attack hit, she'd gotten up and left. James had half a second to wonder where she'd gone before everything went crazy. The raiders boarded through the cargo bay. James heard the explosion that blew open the outer doors, heard the thuds and clangs of boarding equipment being deployed. He was heading down there with whatever weapons he could grab when he heard the screaming. Not human screaming. Something else. Something primal and terrifying. James ran toward the sound and stopped dead in his tracks. The cargo bay looked like something out of a nightmare. There were 5 raiders down there, all armed, all trained soldiers. And standing between them and the interior of the ship was Nova. Her fur was bristled up, making her look twice her actual size. Her teeth were bared, and she was making this sound, this deep, bone-shaking growl that seemed to vibrate through the metal walls themselves. The raiders were backing away from her, their weapons raised but nobody firing. They were frozen, caught between trying to figure out what they were looking at and the very real fear radiating from every instinct in their bodies. "What the hell is that?" one of the raiders shouted. Nova moved. She didn't kill anyone. That was the thing James would remember forever about that moment. She could have torn through those 5 soldiers like they were made of paper. Instead, she was surgical. Precise. A slash across an arm sent a weapon flying. A calculated tackle disabled one raider without breaking bones. A swipe that looked like it could disembowel instead just knocked the wind out of someone and sent them crashing into the wall, unconscious but alive. It was like watching someone who knew exactly where the line between stopping a threat and murdering it sat, and she was dancing right on that edge with perfect control. Within 30 seconds, all 5 raiders were on the ground. Some were hurt, sure, but none of them were dead. Nova stood in the middle of them, breathing hard, her golden eyes locked on James as if asking, "Did I do good?" "Yeah," James breathed. "Yeah, you did good." But the real chaos started when the other 2 raider ships realized what had happened. There were emergency transmissions, panicked radio chatter, and then the raiders started pulling back. James listened to their captain screaming orders to retreat, heard the fear in his voice. "What happened down there?" The captain's voice crackled through the communication channel. "What did you bring? What the hell are we fighting?" Before James could respond, the 3 ships jumped to hyperspace and disappeared. David rushed into the cargo bay, his face pale. "They're gone. They just ran." Over the next few hours, as James and his crew assessed the damage and treated the wounded raiders they'd captured, something extraordinary started happening. Messages were flooding into the Pathfinder's communication system from every corner of known space. Intelligence agencies, military organizations, news outlets, independent traders, everyone was talking about the same thing. A human commander had trained an Empress Feline. A creature that was supposed to be nothing but savage instinct had been turned into something controlled, something disciplined, something that could make moral choices in the heat of battle. The galactic community didn't know whether to be fascinated or terrified. Most of them settled on both. By morning, the story had spread across every star system. And fear, genuine fear, started to take root in places that had never felt threatened before. Because now they all knew the truth: humans could do something nobody else had ever managed. They could change the rules of the game entirely. The summons arrived 3 days after the raid. James was sitting in his quarters, going over repair estimates with Patricia, when the communication system lit up with an official seal from the Galactic Council. His stomach sank immediately. He knew what this was about. "Commander James Mitchell," the message began in that formal, sterile tone that governments always used. "You are hereby ordered to present yourself and the entity designated as Nova at the Central Court of Justice on Meridian Prime within 14 days. Failure to comply will result in immediate seizure of your vessel and mandatory detention. This is not a request." James read it twice, then looked at Patricia. "Well, I guess we're going to court." The journey to Meridian Prime took 10 days. James spent most of that time preparing, going through legal databases, researching precedent cases, and trying to figure out how to explain Nova to a room full of aliens who'd spent generations believing her species was nothing but monsters. It wasn't going to be easy. When they arrived at the massive space station that served as the Galactic Council's headquarters, there were already news drones hovering outside. The story had blown up everywhere. Some outlets were calling James a hero who'd tamed the untamable. Others were calling him a fool who'd created a weapon that would destroy civilization. Nova was being treated like she was either the salvation of the galaxy or its doom, and nobody seemed interested in the middle ground. The courtroom itself was a massive circular chamber with 3 tiers of seating. Representatives from over 200 different species filled the seats. Some were humanoid, some weren't even close. There was a Valdrin, a silicon-based creature the size of a small building. There were Lysian telepaths, their skin shifting colors as they processed thoughts. There were dozens of other species, all of them staring down at James and Nova as they entered. At the center, 3 judges sat behind a raised platform. They were chosen from the most respected species in the galaxy: a Turellian elder, a human representative, and a ZYX diplomat. The Turellian spoke first. Commander James Mitchell, you stand accused of violating multiple galactic protocols. Specifically, you harbored a Class A threat species without authorization, trained said entity in combat techniques, and allowed it to harm multiple law enforcement officers. How do you respond? James took a breath. He'd practiced this speech 100 times. Your Honors, I'm here today to ask you to look at this differently. Nova isn't a threat. She's a sentient being who's been denied her rights because of prejudice and fear. A wave of sounds rippled through the courtroom. Some were angry, some were curious. Prejudice? One of the alien representatives scoffed. Empress felines have destroyed entire colonies. They are killers by nature. They were killers by choice, James said, and he could feel Nova shift beside him, her presence calm and steady. But here's what nobody wants to talk about. Empress felines have always been kept isolated, studied like lab animals, treated as nothing but dangerous beasts. Nobody ever tried to teach them anything else. Nobody ever showed them that there was another way to be. He pulled up data on the holographic display. I have medical records showing Nova's mutation. I have behavioral records from my crew documenting her learning process. I have footage from the recent attack showing her subduing threats without lethal force. That's not instinct. That's choice. That's morality. A representative from the Vex Collective stood up. This proves nothing. You could have programmed her, chemically altered her, used some kind of mind control technology. Then test her, James said flatly. Neurologically scan her. Run every diagnostic you want. You'll find nothing but her own mind making her own choices. Over the next 3 days they did exactly that. They brought in specialists, ran tests, interviewed James's crew, reviewed every piece of data he had. And slowly the narrative started to shift. When they scanned Nova's brain, they found no artificial implants, no chemical suppressants, no evidence of external control. They just found a brilliant mind that had been shaped by education and example. Then James did something bold. He asked Nova to testify. The courtroom went silent. Empress felines didn't speak, or at least that was what everyone had always believed. Nova stood, and in a voice that was rough but clear, she spoke in standard galactic. I was left to die, she said simply. James Mitchell gave me life. He taught me that strength can exist without cruelty. That intelligence can be used for protection instead of destruction. He showed me what it means to choose mercy. I'm not his weapon. I am his student. And I am asking this council to see me as what I am, a being capable of choice, of growth, of being more than what fear says I should be. The courtroom erupted. Some species were arguing angrily. Others looked stunned. But James could see something changing in the eyes of the judges. They were really looking at Nova now. Really seeing her. After hours of debate, the head judge finally spoke. This council hereby recognizes the entity known as Nova as a sentient being with full rights and protections under galactic law. Furthermore, we find no evidence that Commander Mitchell has violated any protocols. However, this sets a precedent that requires further study. We are establishing a commission to investigate the potential for rehabilitation and integration of Empress feline populations. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough. As James and Nova left the courtroom, surrounded by news drones and reporters shouting questions, he realized something fundamental had changed. The galaxy was starting to see Empress felines differently. And more importantly, they were starting to see what humans could do, not through weapons or warfare, but through compassion and belief in something better. The political storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time, there was hope that it might lead somewhere good. 6 months after the trial, James received a message that changed everything. It came from an encrypted channel, routed through a dozen different relay stations to avoid detection. The voice on the other end was rough, ancient, and carried the weight of centuries. Commander Mitchell, my name is Carthax. I am what your people would call a keeper of the old ways among the Empress felines. We have heard what your student has done. We have heard her words in the galactic courts. There are those among my kind who wish to meet with her, to listen. But we must do this carefully. Our society does not take kindly to change. James looked at Nova, who was sitting by the viewport watching the stars. She turned to him, those golden eyes asking the question before her mouth did. We're going, James said. Whatever happens next, we're doing this together. Finding the hidden Empress feline colony took weeks. They were clever about hiding their location, but they wanted to be found by Nova specifically. When the Pathfinder finally descended through the atmosphere of a world that officially didn't exist on any galactic map, James saw something that took his breath away. The landscape was brutal and beautiful. Jagged mountains of black stone, forests of crystalline plants that caught the light like frozen fire. And everywhere, Empress Felines. Hundreds of them. Thousands maybe. They moved through the terrain with that fluid grace James had come to recognize, but something was different about them. They looked tired. Worn down. Like they were carrying weight that had become too heavy to bear. Carthax was waiting for them in a massive stone chamber carved into the mountainside. He was old, his golden fur streaked with silver, his body scarred from countless battles. When he saw Nova, he bowed his head slightly. "You are the one who chose a different path," Carthax said. "I was shown a different path," Nova replied. "By someone who believed I could be more than what I was born to be." Over the following days, Nova met with the leaders of her scattered kind. Empress Felines, it turned out, had never really been unified. They lived in competing clans, constantly fighting for resources and dominance. Their society was structured around violence and conquest. It was exhausting. It was destructive. And after generations of it, many of them were tired. Nova told them her story. She talked about what she'd learned from James, about discipline that came from choice rather than force, about strategy that didn't require bloodshed, about strength that could be used to protect instead of just to dominate. Some of the older leaders listened with skepticism etched into every line of their faces. Others leaned forward, hungry for what she was saying. "For 10,000 years, we have defined ourselves by our claws and our hunger," Nova said, standing on a high stone overlooking the gathered clans. "We conquered, we destroyed, and we called it greatness. But look at us. We are isolated. We are feared. We are dying because we have no allies, no one who will work with us, no one who believes we are anything but monsters." "Because we are monsters," one of the older males growled. "It is our nature." "No," Nova said firmly. "It is our choice. And I am choosing something different. I am choosing to be more." The turning point came when one of the younger clan leaders, a female named Thessala, stood up and challenged the old guard. "I am tired of fighting," Thessala said, her voice ringing through the chamber. "I am tired of my cubs being raised to kill before they learn to think. I want to hear what Nova has to say. I want to know if there is another way." Others stood with her. Not all of them, but enough. Enough that the old system began to crack. Over the next 3 months, Nova worked with James and a growing group of Empress Felines who wanted change. They established new communities based on cooperation instead of domination. They created educational systems where young Empress Felines learned strategy, diplomacy, and philosophy alongside combat training. They began reaching out to other species tentatively at first, but with genuine interest. When the Galactic Council learned what was happening, there was shock and disbelief. But they also saw an opportunity. Trade agreements were negotiated. Cultural exchanges were arranged. Empress Felines began serving as diplomats and mediators instead of just raiders and mercenaries. A year after the first meeting with Carthax, Nova was formally crowned Empress of the United Empress Feline clans. It was a ceremony that blended ancient traditions with new values. Warriors and philosophers stood side by side. The old ways were honored, but the new vision was celebrated. James stood to the side watching and felt something he hadn't expected, pride so intense it almost knocked the wind out of him. This creature he'd saved, this cub he'd nursed back to health, had become something truly extraordinary. She hadn't just changed herself. She'd changed her entire species. "Thank you," Nova said to him later, when they were alone in the Grand Hall. "For believing in me when I was nothing but a dying animal. For teaching me that strength and mercy could exist in the same being." "You did this," James replied. "I just showed you it was possible." "No," Nova said, and she placed her massive head against his chest, something only she ever did. "You didn't just show me. You proved it. Every single day you proved that another way existed. You lived it. And I wanted to be like you." In the years that followed, the galaxy changed. Empress Felines became known not as the Great Destroyers, but as beings of remarkable intelligence and capability. Trade flourished. Conflicts that had seemed impossible to resolve were mediated by Empress Feline diplomats who understood both strength and compassion. James eventually retired from exploration. He became an advisor to Nova, helping her navigate the complexities of galactic politics. And sometimes, on quiet nights, they would stand together and watch the stars, two beings from different worlds who had proven that connection, trust, and belief in something better could rewrite history itself. The message was simple, but it echoed across the galaxy for generations. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in weapons or technology. It was in the capacity to see potential in others, to teach without judgment, and to believe that change was always possible. And that made all the difference.